sad reality is that right now, you are probably not going to be able to buy a house in Canada. I'm gonna explain why. Hey there, and welcome back to the weekly news recap here on Bald Prairie Real Estate. My name is Matthew Pfeifer, real estate agent in Regina. That's my trusted assistant, 𝗤𝗲𝗏𝗀. This is where we go through the most interesting Canadian real estate related news topics, and I give you my thoughts and opinions on them. So we'll be talking about why you are probably never going to own a house in Canada. And of course, a whole bunch of other real estate related news topics, including this week's best mortgage interest rates. But we got to start off with another one of my terrible bad dad jokes. What did the baby corn say to the mama corn? Where is popcorn? If you have a terrible joke I can use in a future episode, put it in the comments below. Let's get into this week's real estate news. Starting things off, once again, the Bank of Canada had a jumbo interest rate cut. Looking quickly back on my poll, 40% of you said that the Bank of Canada would cut rates 25%, and 30% of you said it was going to be a 50 basis cut. Congratulations to the 30% of you that got that right this week. Surprisingly, 8% said the Bank of Canada was going to raise interest rates. Really? Come on. I said at the beginning of this year, I thought we were going to get 1.25% in interest rate cuts from the Bank of Canada. Well, we got 1.75%. I wasn't expecting the Bank of Canada to do these two big 50 basis point cuts, their last two meetings of the year, but here's where we are. And it does seem that the Bank of Canada is going to continue cutting rates in 2025, but they are indicating that the pace of rate cuts is likely going to slow down. So potentially 25 basis cuts coming in next year, but we'll have to wait and see. And I will talk about that in my 2025 predictions video, how many cuts we're going to get in 2025. Fast pause here. You're ready to buy a house, but you don't have a great real estate agent. Don't worry, I can handpick one for you from my great network of agents anywhere in the country. If you look in the description of this video, there's a link to my calendar where you can book me for an agent consultation, and I'm going to find you the perfect agent. Next up, let's talk about the Government of Canada doubling the secondary suite program. This program was originally rolled out as a $40,000 loan to allow you to build a secondary suite either in your basement or one of those garden/laneway suites. It's now been increased to $80,000. It's a 2% interest rate paid out over 15 years, so pretty good terms there. The $80,000 will probably get you a basement suite. It is not going to get you a laneway suite, that's for sure. Those are probably starting about $250,000 and going from there. And that was my main criticism of this program. You know, with the $40,000 really wasn't much. So $80,000 is going to be better. We're finally seeing all governments realize that we have a housing crisis and we need to get more units. I just wish it didn't take a housing crisis and prices going through the roof, rent going through the roof, for them to actually realize they need to do something about it. Now let's get into this week's best mortgage interest rates. After basically a month of no movement for interest rates, we're seeing interest rates heading down right now. Starting off with insured mortgages, the best 3-year is 4.29 through Radius, and that is a drop from last week. Then you have the 5-year fixed, 4.19 through Radius, also a drop. On the variable side of things, the best 5-year adjustable, 4.45 through Marathon, a 0.5 percentage point drop, mirroring the Bank of Canada. And the best static variable was 4.5% through Manulife, also a 0.5 percentage point drop. Now let's look at uninsurable mortgage interest rates. The best 3-year, 4.69 through B2B, that is a drop. The best 5-year fixed, 4.69 through Manulife or B2B, that's unchanged. When it comes to variables, the best static variable I could find, 4.9% through Scotiabank, a 0.5% drop. And the best adjustable, 4.95 through Strive, also a 0.5% drop. It seems the big 5 banks in Canada did not get the memo that interest rates are dropping because they made no changes at all whatsoever to their best 5-year fixed insurable mortgage interest rates. Looking at the 5-year Canada bond rate, it's currently at 2.9% at the time of recording here. It was 2.8 just a couple of days ago. We have seen though, basically in the last month, starting at about 2.75, it went up to about 3.3, back down to 2.8, up to 2.9 today. And really fixed rates haven't moved at all from the banks. They've basically stayed where they're at with small, 10 basis point changes here and there, not really mirroring what's going on with the bond rate. It seems they're content to sit where they are right now. As always, these interest rates actually do vary by region. So what you get in Quebec is going to be different than what you can get in BC. And as I've always said, the lowest mortgage interest rate is not always the best mortgage. I've done a great explainer video on it. You should really watch that if you haven't already. Put a link to that in one of those pop-up cards, and it'll be linked in the description below. Next, let's talk about mortgage arrears rate in Canada as per the Canadian Bankers Association. Every month, the Canadian Bankers Association puts these stats out, and I like going through them for you guys, kind of explaining some of the nuance and little details here. So if you're new here, mortgage arrears is keeping track of how many people are behind on their mortgage payments. People that are behind on mortgage payments could potentially end up in foreclosure. So it's a good stat and metric to go through. Now, the Canadian Bankers Association data covers all of the big banks. It does not cover all of the monoline lenders. It does cover some of them. It doesn't cover credit unions, but the credit union stats typically pretty much mirror what's going on with the big banks. So that you kind of clump together here would be similar results. It also doesn't cover private mortgages. Now, nationally, private mortgages are a relatively small part of the market. The Prairie is almost non-existent, or an extremely small portion, I should say, whereas in Ontario and in BC, a much larger percent of the market there, probably closer to about 15 or 18% of the market there would be private lenders. Now, those will have for sure higher arrears rates. They're generally dealing with more risky borrowers, and they build it into their business model to account for those higher loss rates. These stats are as of the end of September because mortgage arrears are 90 days late on the mortgage payments. So that's why September is the newest stats here. It doesn't then include some of the recent cuts in interest rates from variable rates, but also fixed rates trending down a little bit. So those aren't really captured in this data quite yet. But if you look, we're at 0.2%. That's actually unchanged from the previous month. Pre-pandemic, that level typically was around 0.3 to 0.35%. So even still, after all of the rate increases we've had since 2022, and obviously now falling back off, mortgage arrears hasn't even got back up to the pre-pandemic levels, which was already considered really, really low. I do expect this will trend up a little bit with interest rate cuts now kind of working their way through the pipeline. It will probably slow down a little bit, but even still, it's a very small percentage of mortgages. They go 10,000 mortgages of 5 million that are in arrears right now. I've heard a lot of people talk about how unemployment is going to impact mortgage arrears, and obviously that makes sense. If you don't have a job, you're not going to be paying your mortgage. The theory goes, though, that there's going to be a lag time between unemployment going up and mortgage arrears going up. Looking at this chart provided by the Canadian Bankers Association, you can see they actually move a lot closer together than you would probably expect. So it doesn't seem like that actually turns out in reality that there's a significant lag time between unemployment increases and mortgage arrears. And then looking at this province by province, Ontario, BC, and Quebec continue to have the lowest arrears rate, 0.17, so below the national average. Even though we've heard a lot, especially in Ontario, about all the foreclosure sales coming up, the mortgage arrears rate is still one of the lowest in the country. Now let's go through the Rentals.ca monthly rent report. The cost of rent, according to Rentals.ca, is dropping, but that very much depends where you live in Canada, because that's not true across the entire country. Now remember, with Rentals.ca, this is asking rents, which are typically a little bit different, usually higher than what actual rents people are paying per month. Nationally, rent has dropped to an astronomically low $2,140 per month. That is crazy. That is down to a 15-month low and down 1.6% annually. It was also down about 1.2% last month as well. Similar to what we saw last month, it's the most expensive cities in Canada that are seeing the largest declines year over year in the rents. Vancouver is down 11%, Burnaby down 7 to 11%, Toronto down 7 to 11%, Mississauga down a couple of percent. And then on the flip side, the cheapest places in Canada rent are seeing the biggest year over year rent increases. Regina up about 5 to 7%, Edmonton up 5%, and Saskatoon, which has seen some astronomical year over year increase in rent, that's up double digits once again. If the government does hit their population targets for 2025 and 2026, and I still continue to maintain that's a very big if, but if that happens, it will likely continue to put downward pressure on rents, especially in those more expensive markets like Toronto and Vancouver. I do think the more affordable markets like we see in the prairies will probably continue to see rent increases through 2025 though. And if you want to dig through the report yourself, I'll link in the description below. Now let's talk about why you will not be able to own a house in Canada. This is where I want to talk about why you will not be able to own a house in Canada. And I want to be specific when I say house. I'm not saying property, because if you look at this article from the Toronto Sun, they're talking about Ontario, and these problems are more acute in Ontario than they are in other parts of the country, but you can see this playing out across the country. We simply don't build single family homes anymore. That's why I say I think we're headed to a world where you are not going to be able to buy a house. It's only going to be for the privileged, rich elite. If you look at the article here, they're talking about 1950, 95% of new construction was single family homes. Flash forward to today, that's below 40%. But not only are we building fewer single family homes, thus making them even more out of reach for most everyday Canadians, the ones that we are building have gotten significantly larger and thus more expensive. Now, I've talked ad nauseum on this channel that in my opinion, the cost of fees and taxes that governments add onto housing is one of the biggest drivers of unaffordability in Canada. But when you're building fewer single family homes and the ones that you are building are getting significantly larger, in this case, 1950s, a lot of single family homes were under 1,000 square feet. If you got a 1,000 square foot house back in 1950s, you had a pretty big house. Flash forward to today, the median size is 2,400 square feet. So fewer homes are being built. The ones that are being built are significantly larger, thus more expensive and requiring more land, that those fees and taxes get added on as well. That doesn't make homes more affordable. We're just not building starter single family homes anymore. So as a first-time home buyer especially, it's becoming almost impossible for you to be able to buy a house. Unfortunately, condos and townhouses are now the new starter home for this generation. But even with that, we're building more and more shoebox condos because apartment condos have actually shrunk in size. Thankfully, townhouses have gotten a little bit bigger, but really, I think for most people in Canada, they strive to own a single family home at the end of the day. That's predominantly what they were raised in, what they would like to start their families and raise their families in. They don't want to raise their families in a 1 or 2 bedroom downtown apartment. They want the white picket fence and the dog in the backyard. One like this that's still sleeping. But when you look at the focus from all levels of government, of all stripes, what are they focusing their priorities on? Purpose-built rentals, basement suites, laneway suites. Not much is being talked about when it comes to smaller single family homes. And that is why we're going to see a trend, if this continues in Canada, where single family homes become just for the elite rich people. No longer is it going to be an option for your everyday Canadians because they're just simply not very many of them. They don't come up for sale very often. And when they do, the prices are going to continue to increase. And that is part of what we're seeing right now, even though in, say, Toronto, where home prices as a whole have trended down, single family homes, especially in the more suburban areas, are continuing to increase. They obviously did fall down, but they're increasing now because, simply put, there's no single family homes to buy. Lots of condos on the market. A huge part of all the 25,000 homes that are available in Toronto, a huge part of those are just 1 or no bedroom apartments in downtown, and a family is not buying those. You can ban all of these speculators and investors and foreign buyers that you want, but if we don't get more homes built, it's not going to make a lick of difference. Single family homes are not going to be more affordable when they simply don't come up for sale, and there's very few of them for sale. And of course, lots of people looking for them. That is going to drive up prices. This is something I was talking about with a friend of mine just last night. We were sitting in my house saying that a house like I have basically doesn't exist in our city anymore. They don't come at the price point that I got mine for. And I only bought mine a few years ago, and they haven't built things like this in basically 15 years in Regina. So somebody who says, hey, I want a house just like yours, Matt, there's not very many of them available. And the ones that do come up for sale have been selling like crazy because everybody wants them. So while all politicians continue to talk about how many units we need built, I really think there needs to be a lot more nuance in this conversation in terms of what types of homes are being built. Sure, we're still going to need condos. Those serve their purpose in the market. We're going to need townhouses. Those have their purpose in the market. But if at the end of the day, most people want to see and buy single family homes, well, then we need to get more of those built. We need to find a way to make those more affordable and available for people to buy. Speaking of the 25,000 homes for sale in Toronto right now, I talk about that right here in my most recent monthly Canadian real estate market update. So check out that video if you haven't already. As always, guys, thanks very much for watching.